Hello, my name is Alan Jones, and I welcome you to another life story coming to you from Life Stories Worldwide. We bring you stories from across the world, and our stories go out to so many different parts, so many different countries. We bring you stories of people who've gone through all types of challenges and struggles in their lives, but how those lives have been transformed. And you're going to hear a story today about a challenge that has transformed someone. But we are live on Zoom. No, not Zoom tonight. We're live on YouTube, Facebook, and StreamYard. And you can watch us on our website, Lifestoriesworldwide.com. That's probably one of the easiest ways to watch on our website. Our story today comes from Eastbourne in the UK, where we have Rob Kelly waiting to share his story. When he was in his teens and early 20s, Rob was doing all sorts of things to distance himself from God, but he came back to God at the age of 27. He has worked with some of the world's largest international development organizations, and he has felt secure in his faith. But in April this year, he had a medical diagnosis which caused him to wonder whether he really wanted God's will in his life. So I'm going to hand over now to Rob to share his story. Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, Alan, and hello, everybody. It's really good to be with you this evening. I think before I start, I probably need to explain why I look pretty different now compared to how I did on the photo that was sent around to advertise the talk. I took that photo from my company's website, which was taken about a year ago now. But as you can see, there's not much going on up top with my hair these days, and that's because in April this year I got diagnosed with quite a rare form of blood cancer. So yeah, that's why I look a bit different. I'm going to share a little bit more about that a little bit later on. But what I really wanted to do today is to share my testimony really in three parts. The first part about how I came to the Lord, or how the Lord came and got me. The second part about what the Lord's done in my career and how He's taken me places and done things that, quite frankly, as a child, as a young person, I would never really have dreamt of. And then thirdly, I'll talk a bit about the cancer diagnosis, what happened, a couple of occasions where I felt the Lord was really clearly spoke to me, and I had to really submit to His will rather than to try and do things under my own steam there, that's for sure. So really the overarching theme of what I'll share is that God does unexpected things. Many times in my life I've been going along pretty happily before I knew the Lord and since as well. And then God's come and done something, or something's happened to me and God's been there for me in ways that I just couldn't really have quite imagined. So I think I'm reminded of Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20, which says, "Now to Him who's able to do immeasurably more than all we can ask or imagine, according to His power that's at work within us." And that's the kind of overarching thought that I had when I was thinking about this talk today. So let's start about talking about how I came to Christ. So as you can see, I'm a guy in my mid-40s. Grew up in a smallish town on the south coast of England, a town called Eastbourne, for anybody who's heard of it. And I grew up in a pretty normal family. We were a working class family. My dad fixed TVs for a living, and my mum worked in various supermarkets. So very normal, pretty happy upbringing. We went to our local Anglican church, used to walk there on a Sunday morning. But I think we were kind of the last of that generation, I suppose, in England, where people kind of went to church on a Sunday without necessarily having a really firm faith. So we would go, and then we would stop going, and then we would go again. But I stuck at it, and so did my sister, and we used to go to various Christian youth clubs, both associated with our church, and this really great one called Friday at 5 o'clock on a Friday, in an estate next to ours, which I look back now and I think about the old ladies who used to run it, and I think, wow, it's just incredible the job that they did. And I was really happy in that way, finding out about the Lord, learning different Bible stories, learning about Jesus, of course. But when I was about, I don't know, probably 12 or 13, I just decided that not that I wasn't interested, but that I just couldn't really see where I fit within that. And so I stopped going. Just didn't go anymore. And then throughout my teenage years, they were probably mostly focused around playing sport, and particularly football or soccer for any brothers and sisters in the US. So I spent a lot of time doing that. Kind of got in with the tough crowd at school. I was never a tough person. I should make that very clear straight away. I'm not particularly tough. I was probably the most annoying type of person, the one who's just on the outside, kind of cheering people on who are doing all the stuff, all the tough stuff. Yeah, not a great way to be honest. But I had a fairly sort of linear experience at school. Went to sixth form college, did A levels between the ages of 16 and 18, and then went to a university. Went to a university in Stoke-on-Trent in England. Studied there, and I wouldn't say at that point I was really against the Lord. I just wasn't really looking. I just felt I had quite a lot in my life, stuff that made me happy, stuff that kept me interested, and so I was just kind of bobbling along on my own, really. So then I after university, got into my 20s, started my career. So I began my career as a journalist. Spent a couple of years doing that. Journalism in the UK, certainly at the level I was at, which was a local journalist in my hometown, doesn't pay very much, but I was pretty poor but pretty happy, enjoying the kind of thrills and spills of journalism. I look back now and I think sometimes I could certainly have done with God in my life then. I think particularly about, we often had to do what's called death knocks. So if someone's passed away in a particularly kind of sudden or tragic way, then the media will often go to the house, try and speak to the family. And when I think about it now, I think I wish I'd been praying for those people. I wish that if there had been opportunities to speak of the Lord, I'd use those opportunities. But at that time, I just wasn't there. I sort of around the fringes of some bad stuff. I'd stayed in broad friendship with those tough mates that I talked about earlier, and we got up to various things that young people unfortunately seem to do in nightclubs and at football matches and things like that. As I say, I was never fully in it in the way that others were, but certainly doing some things now that don't make me particularly proud. So then I got to my mid-20s and things started to change. I didn't really know where I was going, and I can clearly remember saying to one of my friends at the start of, I think it was 2006 or maybe 2007, I said, I just don't know where this is going. Like, I'm not excited about this new year. I think I said it perhaps on the 1st or 2nd of January. I don't really have stuff in my life. I mean, I had a job, I had a girlfriend who I was very happy with at the time, I had a house, so there was nothing. It wasn't as if I was kind of wanting for anything in the material side. I just felt a kind of emptiness, and that kind of grew and grew. And then in early 2007, I went to a wedding. My girlfriend at the time was a bridesmaid, and the pastor said, I'm really glad you're all here today, and I realise I'm not going to see many of you again, if any of you again. But I want you to think about this. He said, I want you to think, when you've got a problem, when you're in a fix, when you really feel that you need something and you're in a position where there's something you can't do anything about it, do you ever put your hands together and pray? Do you ever say, God, please help me to get this job? Or God, please fix this situation? Or in an extreme circumstance, God, please spare my life in this situation. And I thought to myself, yeah, I do that. I've definitely, over the last 10 years when I haven't been walking with God, I've definitely asked God for stuff. And then the vicar said, well, if you're doing that, who are you praying to? If you don't believe in God, then what's the point of you putting your hands together, closing your eyes, and asking for something? And that really resonated with me. And I feel I think that the Lord had been prompting me all the way through, but perhaps I just wasn't listening. And then at that specific moment, it really caused me to think more about what was going on. God clearly put that in my way. God put something even more significant in my way about a year later when I met my now wife, Caroline. So she was and is a Christian, and we lead Living Stones Church in Eastbourne together. But when we were first dating, I wasn't a Christian, and she told me very early on that she was. And it again led to a thought path. What does this mean? What does dating a Christian mean? And I think at the time I just thought, well, I've never been in that kind of relationship before. Does it mean we can't kiss? Does it mean we can't hold hands? All these kind of things. But I came to realize later on that God had put Caroline in my life to facilitate my move back towards Him. So after about 6 months of dating, I said, I'd really like to come to your church, see what it's about. And the first thing that struck me was how everybody in that room had a relationship with God. I think when I was a kid, growing up, thinking back to my old church when I was a boy, it felt like the vicar had some kind of cosmic hotline, and that the rest of us were just there to see what he was going to bring back. Whereas at this church, this evangelical church, small evangelical church in Eastbourne, for every single person was speaking to God, and God was listening to them, and God was acting in their lives. And I think a month later, maybe less than that, I think I still put up a little bit of resistance, but I gave my life to the Lord. And as I suppose a lot of people say, it was like a weight was lifted off my shoulders, or it was like the ground parted beneath my feet. I can't fully describe the physical feeling, but I knew that I was there, and I knew that I was a son. About 2 or 3 months later, in the September, I got baptized in the sea. This is one of the benefits of living in a coastal town. What wasn't a benefit was it was September and the sea was absolutely freezing. But when I got washed clean, it was it's a hugely significant moment in my life, and really kind of set the foundations, I suppose, for everything that was going to come next. So that was how I came to the Lord. But at that time, I was kind of plodding along career-wise. I mean, I was pretty happy with where I'd got to. As I said, I started off as a journalist, which was super interesting. Didn't pay very much, but that was okay. I really enjoyed what I did. I got to meet quite a lot of interesting local people. Then I got an opportunity to move into PR, public relations, communications, whatever people prefer to call it. And that was quite interesting. I worked for a government organisation that kind of had a presence in different regions in the UK. So if the central government was making an announcement, it was our job to explain how that impacted people in my part of the country, the southeast of England, but we had offices in the northeast, the northwest, etc. And that was all fine as well. And then I think in 2007, I took a role in central government. I worked for the Department for Education, which was, again, super interesting. I worked with a lot of really senior journalists who were trying to write generally pretty negative stories about what the department's education policy was and how it was affecting children. You had things like statistics on GCSE results, on truancy, on behaviour, these kind of things, and it was exciting. It was exciting doing battle, I suppose, with these journalists all the time. But it was while I was at the department that I came to the Lord, and it's quite interesting actually. One time we used to have this meeting every morning where we'd look through the day's newspapers and try and work out what were the stories we could argue against, what were the stories that we just had to accept. And I remember there was one about faith in schools, and the head of the department at the time said, "Is anybody here got a faith?" And I put my hand straight up, and then looked around and realised nobody else had put their hand up. And then everyone just come up to me afterwards and say, "Oh, good for you, well done, you've got a faith." And I thought, well, that's not really the point. And if anybody wants to come and talk to me about that, I'll be happy to have that conversation. But it was interesting. It was an interesting place to work, but it was kind of faithless, I suppose. And having come to the Lord again, I started getting this feeling of drift. The work was interesting and challenging, but it wasn't really giving me a great sense of fulfillment. So I was looking around for something else to do, and then a job came up at the Department for International Development, which it's now part of the Foreign Office, but it was at the time the UK's International Development Ministry. So it had a budget of somewhere around £10 billion to spend to try to help alleviate poverty in countries, mostly in Africa and Asia, strong relationships in countries like India, Bangladesh, Sierra Leone, Nigeria, all around the world. But it did it on the basis that we wanted to work as equal partners. I'd grown up in the 1980s where we had things like Band-Aid and Comic Relief, and they all presented quite a negative image of Africa and people in Africa in particular. But at DFID, which was the acronym for the Department for International Development, there was a real focus on trying to be partners and trying to do work together and to work across different areas, so through health, education, governance, helping countries to strengthen their government institutions and things like that. Helping to try for countries to raise living standards like that. And I think in some ways we were successful. I think in other ways we weren't. But it was a really great place for my faith, and I really felt that I was living out my faith by being part of that department and that department's mission. It was also quite personally enriching. There was a really strong Christians in DFID group while I was there, and we met, I think, every week or every fortnight, and we were praying for each other. We were praying for each other's projects. We were praying for each other personally. We were praying for people who were going on trips and missions and things like that. And I was really faith strengthening at that time, and I just don't think I would have found that in any of my previous roles. And then finally, it gave me the opportunity to travel, and this I think comes back to things that I never imagined when I was a kid. I imagined I'd probably, I don't know, work in a supermarket, or if I was really lucky, drive trains, because that's what I wanted to do when I was a kid. Unfortunately, as you might be able to see on the screen, my left eye doesn't quite look in the right direction, so that probably would have ruled me out from being a train driver. But working at DFID gave me the opportunity to travel, and one trip in particular, I went to Pakistan for 2 weeks during the floods there in 2010. And I got to know a couple of Christians there quite quickly, actually, which was really good. And they invited me to church, which was amazing. But what was even more amazing for me was that it was the first time I'd ever been to church, having to be scanned with one of those wands to see if you're carrying anything. We had to walk through one of those metal arches that will go off if you're carrying anything you shouldn't be, and then had to turn out my pockets and things like that. I thought to myself, gosh, this is rather a lot to go to church. I mean, I realised the country context I was in, and that it's certainly not easy to be a Christian in Pakistan. As I walked through into the main hall, there was a big plaque there for I think it was 7 Christians who'd been killed there when the church had been attacked, and many people had been shot.